What if I told you every time you read the Old Testament and see the word God, it's just a mistranslation and was never intended by the author to be read or interpreted as such? The biblical term God derives from a form of Greek known as Byzantine text form, and the word used in the ancient Greek is theos. We see evidence of this in the stem of the English word theology. Ology being the root word meaning a subject of study, a branch of knowledge, and the stem word theos meaning God, creating the definition of theology, the study of God. However, if theos meaning God is a Greek word, but the ancient Hebrew language predates the ancient Greek language by millennia, then what was the word used by the Hebrews in the Hebrew Bible, and what did it mean? Although there are several words translated as God, the first term we come across in the Hebrew Bible is the Hebrew word Elohim, oftentimes translated as a singular God. It's commonly known in modern academia that Elohim is a masculine plural noun referring to more than one. According to Jeff A. Benner in his book Ancient Hebrew Dictionary, 1000 Verbs and Nouns of the Hebrew Bible, term 415, Elohim translates to powers, with a breakdown of the Hebrew plural and its ability to identify quantity as well as quality. It's then stated that Elohim is the one of great strength and authority, even though he didn't follow the Hebrew plural laws, so it should be read as the ones of great strength and authority. Hood scholarship. Hood scholarship. What if I told you Yahweh is not a name? In Exodus 3:14, we're formally introduced to the Elohah, which is the singular form of the word Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in which he claims his name to be the Holy Tetragrammaton, or the transliteration of the Hebrew consonants Yod-He, Wav-He, commonly translated as Yahweh. Moses asked the Elohah who was before him, "Who should I say sent me to the children of Israel?" And the text reads, "And God said unto Moses, I am that I am." Is that what it means? Well, when reading the text from my preferred Hebrew to English interlinear ESV Old Testament, the commentary on this particular verse stood out to me, saying that the phrase, "I am what I am," can also be rendered as, "I will be what I will be." The word used in the text is Hayah, Strong Concordance number 1961, meaning to be. However, in the Hebrew language, there is no form of the verb to be. So when confused about something, I try to trace it back to its origins. From the 3rd century BCE is the oldest version of the Old Testament, known as the Septuagint, which is said to have been the first translation of the text from a Hebrew text that has no longer survived. And when we look at Exodus 3:14 in the Septuagint, we come to a startling reading. The text says, "And God spoke to Moses, saying, I am the being. The being has sent me to you." So through comparative study with the Hebrew interlinear ESV and the Septuagint, I decided to look into the Israelite Samaritan version of the Torah, circa 122 BCE, and the text states, "And Elohim said to Moshe, Eyi Eshad Eyi, and he said, This you say to the sons of Yisrael, I will be has sent me to you." In the commentary, the phrase Eyi Asher Eyi is translated as "I will be as I will be." So the text translates to, "And Elohim said to Moshe, I will be as I will be. And he said, This you say to the sons of Yisrael, I will be has sent me to you." So in essence, he's saying, it doesn't matter my name. All that matters is I am. Hood scholarship. Hood scholarship. What if I told you the people of the Bible are descendants of the oldest civilization known to modern academia, the Sumerians of Sumer, and the Bible backs up the claim? In Genesis 11:26, the text reads, "And Terah lived 70 years and begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran." Abram, whose name later is changed to Abraham, is the progenitor of the chosen people of God. And 2 verses later, the text makes clear of where Terah and his sons are from, stating, "And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldeans." Now, Ur was once a very important city-state, found in ancient Mesopotamia, located at the mouth of the Euphrates. The city of Ur was a prime real estate for a flourishing civilization that seemed to come out of nowhere, known as the Sumerians, who are also referred to as the black-headed ones, or the Sagiga. Now, the Sumerians are accredited to being the oldest civilization known to modern academia, where it's said we get mass-produced pottery, the chariot, mathematics, and even detailed stories of a collection of gods, commonly known as the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are part of a collection of stories that closely mirror stories found throughout the Hebrew text, most notably in the book of Genesis, such as the creation of man, the fall of man, and the flood story. So after reading Genesis 11:26 and understanding what was going on in the city of Ur, it shouldn't be a surprise that Genesis is nothing more than a synopsis of the stories told by Abraham's ancestors in Samaria about the Anunnaki, which tends to clear up the term we looked over previously in the Hebrew text, Elohim, and the significance of the pluralization of the word in the text. Joshua also makes reference to the Elohim from across the river in Joshua 24:2, when it states, "Thus says Yahweh, Elohe of Israel, on the other side of the river dwelt your fathers. In old times, Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other Elohim." So essentially, Terah served a different Elohim from that of Abraham, which is the Elohe of Israel, simply signifying it's more than one Elohim, the same belief as the Sumerians and the Anunnaki. Not to mention, as a side note, if the Sumerians were called the Sagiga, or the black-headed ones, and the Israelites are descendants of the black-headed ones, then what color do you think the Israelites were? And who the finnuck are they?
Hood scholarship. This hood scholarship.
What if I told you Yahweh was a member of the Elohim, and he's one of many Elohe that govern a specific region in the ancient world? Oftentimes, in the Hebrew text, the reader is told that Yahweh and Elohim are interchangeable. We find evidence of this in our many English translations that have copy and pasted the term God over both of these Hebrew terms. However, as we've pointed out before, the term Elohim is plural, and when we look up Strong Concordance number 3068, we find out that the term Yahweh is the holy proper name of God, indicating a singular proper noun. So how can both Yahweh singular and Elohim plural both be translated as God? Well, when reading the Hebrew text, we start to get a clear vision of the story being told when the Hebrew words in question are reinserted into the text, replacing the word God. As we went over previously in Exodus 3:15, immediately after revealing himself unto Moses, Yahweh then claims himself to be the Elohe of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the text reads, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, Yahweh, the Elohe of your fathers, the Elohe of Abraham, the Elohe of Isaac, and the Elohe of Jacob has sent me to you, this my memorial to all generations." So here, Yahweh is singling himself out as a singular member of the Elohim, the Elohe of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We even see evidence of this in the first commandment of the 10 Commandments, as Yahweh initiates a memory erasing of any other Elohim besides himself when the text states, "You shall have no other Elohim before me." Also, in 2 Kings, the first chapter, King Ahaziah, the 6th king of Judah, falls sick and sends messengers to go see the Elohe of Ekron. And Yahweh responds with, "Thus says Yahweh, because there is no Elohim in Israel, you are sending to inquire Baal-zebub, the Elohe of Ekron. Therefore, the bed to which you have gone up on, that not you shall come down from, but surely you shall die." Again, Yahweh separates himself as the Elohe of Israel while clearly recognizing another Elohe of another region, the Elohe of Ekron, Baal-zebub, and punishing the king for going to inquire from the Elohe of Ekron as opposed to Yahweh, the Elohe of Israel. And yet again, Back at Joshua 24:2, when it states, "Thus says Yahweh, Elohei of Israel, on the other side of the river dwelt your fathers. In old times, Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other Elohim." Here, Yahweh is clearly stating that Terah, the father of Abraham, served other Elohim. So if Terah and his ancestors served other Elohim, and Yahweh himself claims to only have come around in the time of Abraham, then how was Yahweh in the Garden of Eden? Well, let's take a look. Genesis 3:22 in the Hebrew Bible states, "And said Yahweh, Elohim, behold, the man has become like one of us." But if Yahweh is singular, then what's with the plural verb usage? Well, what if I told you in the 6th century BCE, during the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Hebrew canon went through a major makeover that copy and pasted the term Yahweh over older Elohim stories, giving off the illusion that the Hebrew text was always of a monotheistic belief in an endless story about one supreme God. Make sure to
Hood scholarship.
What if I told you in the 6th century BCE, during the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Hebrew canon went through a major makeover that copy and pasted the term Yahweh over older Elohim stories, giving off the illusion that the Hebrew text was always of a monotheistic belief? Now, what the 6th century BCE editors of the Hebrew canon forgot to account for was the plural pronoun usage accompanied with their singular God. Two plural pronouns, us and our, are used 7 separate times in 4 separate passages in some of the most pivotal times of the text that refer to a singular God, followed by plural pronouns. The first account of a plural pronoun being used when referring to a quote-unquote God is found in Genesis 1:26 in the creation of man, when apparently God is talking to himself, telling himself,
"And said God, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness."
so who is us and ours? Well, when looking at the Hebrew text, we see the term used there is Elohim instead of God. And knowing from previous discussions that Elohim is a plural noun, it makes sense that it's followed by plural pronouns, keeping in compliance with the laws of the language and further signifying that Elohim does not mean one, but multiple. And yet again, in Genesis 3:22, in the story of the garden, we have more plural usage with the term God. However, when we look in the Hebrew, it states,
"And said Yahweh, Elohim, behold, the man has become like one of us."
Here we see both terms, Yahweh and Elohim, but we know Yahweh is a singular entity, so why is plural pronouns being used with the singular Yahweh? Well, here's where the breadcrumbs lead to the 6th century redaction of the Bible and the copying and pasting of Yahweh, the Elohei of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, over older Elohim stories. In Genesis 11:7, in the story of the Tower of Babel, when God goes down to confuse the language of man, we find another plural pronoun being used. But to keep it in context, let's go back one verse in the Hebrew text to see for ourselves that Yahweh is who these plural pronouns are attributed to. And when the text says,
"Come, let us go down and confuse their language,"
showing us yet another example of the 6th century redactors and their attempt to change the Hebrew text from polytheistic to monotheistic by covering older Elohim stories with the holy name of Yahweh. As stated previously, Yahweh himself claims to have only become the Elohei of Israel at around the time of Abraham, and Abraham's father, Terah, served other Elohim. And realizing Terah didn't know Yahweh, and it's assumed neither did his ancestors because they served other Elohim, then the story starts to come into focus, and we see the significance of Yahweh accompanied with plural pronouns prior to the time of Abraham, thus signifying that the holy name of Yahweh was pasted over stories of the Elohim.
Hood scholarship.
What if I told you in 2008, the Vatican sent a letter to the church directed by the quote-unquote Holy Father in accordance with the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that sole focus is to erase the Holy Tetragrammaton Yahweh from the liturgy of the Christian Church. The letter is titled Letter to the Bishops' Conferences on the Name of God, dated June 29th, 2008, intended as stated in the introduction that
regards the translation and the pronunciation in a liturgical setting of the divine name signified in the sacred Tetragrammaton, along with a number of directives.
So basically, what this letter is an outline on the translation and pronunciation and how it's supposed to be written and said in church according to the church. In the last sentence of the first expose, the Congregation of the Doctrine and their Holy Father, the Pope, admit that they will not only set directives on the holy name of God, but also set out essential facts when it states,
"It is therefore our intention with the present letter to set out some essential facts which lie behind the above-mentioned norm and to establish some directives to be observed in this matter."
So let's take a look at some of these facts and directives on the name of God. So when speaking on the Holy Tetragrammaton, the letter, who again is directed by the Pope and the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, reveals a startling fact when it states,
"As an expression of the infinite greatness and majesty of God, it was held to be unpronounceable and hence was replaced during the reading of sacred scripture by means of the use of an alternate name, Adonai, which means Lord."
So here, the congregation outlined a fact that was practiced by the translators of the oldest version of the Old Testament, known as the Septuagint, when it states in the next paragraph,
"The Greek translation of the Old Testament, the so-called Septuagint, dating back to the last centuries prior to the Christian era, had regularly rendered the Hebrew Tetragrammaton with the Greek word Krios, which means Lord."
Continuing in the tradition of erasing the Holy Tetragrammaton Yahweh from the text and replacing it with the term Lord wasn't just found in one translation, but the main three in which we get our English translations from, when the letter goes on to say,
"Since the text of the Septuagint constituted the Bible of the first generation of Greek-speaking Christians, in which language all the books of the New Testament were also written, these Christians too, from the beginning, never pronounced the divine Tetragrammaton."
When referring to the Latin Vulgate, the letter goes on to say,
"In these translations too, the Tetragrammaton was regularly replaced with the Latin word Dominus, corresponding both to the Hebrew Adonai and to the Greek Krios."
So in three of the foundational texts and languages that created our English translations, they are all said to have replaced the holy name of God with an alternate title or name. In all three languages, the term is translated as Lord. In the Hebrew, we have Adonai. In the Greek, it's Krios. And in the Latin, it's Dominus. In the third expose, the letter lies out another fact that could be shocking the most when it goes on to say,
"The sacred Tetragrammaton was never pronounced in the Christian context nor translated into any of the languages into which the Bible was translated."
So here, the Pope, in accordance with the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, admits that since as far back as the oldest version of the Old Testament we have available, the Holy Tetragrammaton was never translated into the text, which is probably why when we look at Genesis 3:14 and these older texts, we come up with a lot of different translations. So now that the facts are laid out, the Holy Father, aka the Pope, and the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith lay out three directives that are to be observed based on the facts they presented. And the first directive states,
"In liturgical celebrations, in songs and prayers, the name of God in the form of the Tetragrammaton Yahweh is neither to be used or pronounced.
So in short, the holy name isn't supposed to be said nor pronounced, not even in prayers, although Exodus 3:15 tells you,
"This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations."
However, if the Tetragrammaton was never pronounced or translated into any of the languages into which the Bible was translated, dating as far back as the Septuagint, then who are we ordered to pray to by the church? And who have we been praying to if the holy name has been hidden from translations since the beginning? In the second directive, it states, the divine Tetragrammaton is to be rendered by the equivalent of Adonai, Krios, Lord. Again, reiterating, Lord is equivalent to the holy name of God. And in the final directive, it further clarified their equivalency of God and Lord when it states,
Adonai is to be translated Lord, and the form God is to be used for the Tetragrammaton Yod-He, Wav-He, similar to what happens in the Greek translation of the Septuagint and in the Latin translation of the Vulgate.
So in essence, this is similar to the 6th century redaction of the text and pasting Yahweh over older Elohim stories, only now they're pasting God and Lord over Yahweh and Elohim stories. But don't worry, the Holy Father, the Pope, said it's okay, so it must be okay, right?
Hood scholarship.
What if I told you Yahweh was not the Father Jesus was speaking of in the New Testament, and the subliminals that Jesus sent towards Yahweh only further backs his claim? In Luke 11:11, Jesus states,
"If a son shall ask bread of any of you that is a father, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he for a fish give him a serpent?"
So basically, Jesus is saying, as a father, would you give your hungry son anything other than food? Yet the reference to a serpent went over a lot of heads. Seems harmless, right? But as we navigate through the text, we find the story in which Jesus was alluding to all the way back in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, chapter 21, verse 6. But let's set the stage in the proper context first. At this point, the Israelites are out of Egypt, roaming the wilderness, when they realize there's no food or water and they're starving. So they start speaking out against Moses and Yahweh, feeling led astray. Well, let's see what Yahweh proceeds to do to those that speak out against him in Numbers 21:6.
"So sent Yahweh among the people fiery serpents, and they bit the people and died, many of Israel."
So in Luke 11:11, Jesus sets it out, saying whose father would feed their starving son a serpent? Because his wouldn't. And his father says, ask and you shall be given, clearly indicating a disdain for Yahweh and his ways and separating Yahweh from his father.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
Hood scholarship.